The steady beep of the heart monitor cut through the sterile silence of the operating theater. Ammar's face, pale under the harsh surgical lights, was almost unrecognizable beneath the swelling. A curtain of sweat shimmered across Dr. Ayer's brow as he leaned closer, eyes narrowed behind his surgical mask. "BP is dropping. 70/40, a nurse warned. "Prep for adrenaline. Charge the defibrillator just in case," another voice added, urgency creeping in. The beep suddenly turned into a flat tone. For one terrifying second, everything went quiet. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. And then, "Clear," Dr. Ayer barked. The jolt surged through Ammar's fragile frame. The monitor stuttered, then returned with a weak, flickering rhythm. A collective exhale swept through the room. The boy had almost slipped away. Almost. But that wasn't the beginning. Months earlier, the monsoon winds curled through the dusty village of Kalunga, carrying with them the scent of wet earth and distant mango blossoms. A boy sat on the edge of a wooden cot inside a mud-walled house, staring at a fractured mirror. His name was Ammar. The left side of his face was swollen beyond recognition, stretched, and contorted by a tumor so large it cast a shadow over his soul. The skin was taut, veined, pulsing slowly with each heartbeat. His left eye had disappeared beneath the mass. The other eye, dark and glassy, looked out through the mirror's shattered reflection. He had smashed that mirror himself 3 years ago, when the tumor first began to grow out of control. But Joseph, his uncle, had kept the biggest shard. "For when you're ready to look at yourself again," he'd said. Ammar had never been ready. He hated that mirror, not because of what it showed, but because it told the truth. Outside, Joseph called from the yard, his voice worn like his clothes. Ammar didn't answer. He couldn't bring himself to move. Not today. He heard the creak of the gate, then Joseph's slow footsteps approaching. The older man stood in the doorway, holding a bowl of lentil stew. He looked tired, like always, but there was kindness etched in every wrinkle of his face. "You didn't eat," Joseph said gently. "I'm not hungry." Joseph sat beside him, placing the bowl on the floor. "They brought the new school teacher to the village today," he said after a pause. "She asked why you weren't in class." Ammar scoffed. "Did you tell her I'm a monster?" Joseph's jaw clenched. "Don't say that. It's what they think, what they whisper. They don't know you. They don't want to." Joseph was silent for a long time. Then he reached into his satchel and pulled out something small and wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Ammar. Ammar unwrapped it carefully, revealing the old mirror shard, the same one, still cracked. "I thought you threw this away. I thought you'd need it," Joseph said. One day, Ammar stared at the glass. The broken lines across his face seemed to multiply, like scars. He felt something rise in his throat. Rage, grief, despair. He clenched his fist and was about to hurl it across the room. But then he stopped. He didn't know why. He just stopped. There was a knock on the door. Joseph stood, puzzled. No one ever visited them. Ammar felt a sudden dread. He turned away, hiding the left side of his face in reflex, as he always did. The door creaked open. A woman in a pale blue sari stood there, soaked from the rain. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with a stethoscope around her neck and muddy sandals. "Sorry to intrude," she said with a warm smile. "Is this where Ammar lives?" Joseph nodded slowly. "Who's asking? My name is Mina. I'm a nurse with the mobile health unit. We've heard about his condition. One of the village children mentioned it during a checkup." Ammar's heart thudded. "They shouldn't have," he muttered. Mina stepped forward carefully. "I'm sorry if this is sudden, but we're running a free clinic down the road. There's a doctor, Dr. Sri Hari Jangala. He's seen cases like this. He wants to help." Joseph looked at Ammar, searching his face. "I don't need help," Ammar said sharply. Mina didn't flinch. "You need a future." And then, for the first time in a long while, someone looked Ammar in the eye, not with pity, not with fear, but with something dangerously close to hope. That terrified him more than anything. Later that night, long after Mina left, Ammar sat again by the broken mirror, the rain still tapping on the tin roof. He picked up the shard, and for the first time in 3 years, he looked. In Kalunga, the days began before sunrise. At 4:30 in the morning, the sky was still dark, the ground wet with dew and yesterday's dust. Joseph stirred from his cot and lit a kerosene lamp, the small flame casting a warm glow across the cramped hut. Ammar, already awake, was washing his hands in a rusted basin, careful not to splash water on the bandage that wrapped around part of his face. He didn't need an alarm. The ache from the tumor always woke him before the birds did. Joseph watched the boy's back for a moment. In the silence, he saw how much Amar had grown. Taller, broader in the shoulders, but still carrying himself like a child burdened by shame. "You don't have to go today," Joseph offered. "The ox cart can wait." Amar shook his head. "We need the money." Joseph didn't argue. He knew better. By the time the sun had risen over the hills, Amar was already in the fields, helping Joseph load sacks of lentils onto the cart. The other workers, as always, kept their distance. No one ever said anything outright, but Amar could feel it. Their silence was louder than cruelty. No eye contact, no casual words, only the occasional whispered comment when they thought he was out of earshot. "Poor Joseph, raising that boy. It's not natural. It's some kind of curse. The mother died too young. Maybe it was punishment." Amar never responded. He just worked harder, lifted more, carried more, sweated until the pain in his face pulsed like thunder in his skull. He told himself that as long as he could work, it meant he still had some kind of purpose. At the village market, he helped Joseph unload the sacks. Children giggled behind their mothers, hiding behind stalls as if Amar were a ghost. A man selling vegetables spat to the side as Amar passed. He kept his head down. At home, there were no mirrors anymore, except the broken shard Joseph had hidden away. Amar avoided it like poison. He preferred to memorize the house by sound and feel, as if he could erase his body altogether. One night, as the wind howled through the cracks in their walls, Amar sat near the fire, holding a cup of tea in both hands. "Did you know my mother?" he asked softly. Joseph looked up from the pile of clothes he was folding. "I did." "What was she like?" Joseph's expression softened, fierce. "She had eyes like yours, dark, curious. She didn't take nonsense from anyone. She once slapped a man twice her size for mocking your father." Amar smiled faintly. "And my father? Gentle. Too gentle, maybe. But he loved her more than he feared her." Amar's smile faded. "Do you think they'd recognize me now?" Joseph paused. The question hit harder than he expected. "Yes," he said finally. "Not because of your face, but because of how you carry your pain." Amar looked away, the firelight dancing in his one visible eye. The tumor had begun as a small swelling in his cheek when he was 13. At first, they thought it was an abscess, then an infection. By the time it reached his temple, it was already too late. The local clinic had no equipment. The doctors had no answers. "It'll go away," one had said. "Just take these pills." But it didn't go away. It grew, and with it, so did Amar's isolation. He stopped going to school when the boys started throwing chalk at him in class. One girl fainted after seeing him up close. The teacher asked him to sit in the back, just so others can focus. Eventually, he stopped leaving the house altogether, until Joseph pushed him out again. Not with cruelty, but with necessity. The farm needed hands, and Amar needed air. Sometimes, Amar dreamed of cities, places where no one knew his name, where faces blurred together in crowds, and no one stopped to stare. But when he woke up, it was always the same cot, the same cracked ceiling, the same ache beneath his skin. One evening, a group of boys were playing cricket near the house. Amar watched from the porch, hidden behind the curtain of shadow. When the ball bounced into their yard, one boy hesitated. "Go get it," another shouted. "I'm not going in there. What if he touches me?" Laughter erupted. Amar turned away. In the quiet afterward, Joseph placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let them laugh. They don't know the weight you carry. They don't want to know," Amar muttered. "No one does." A week later, Joseph asked Amar to accompany him to the next village with a delivery of grain. Amar hesitated. He hadn't left Kalunga in months, but finally nodded. It was early morning when they began their journey, the ox cart creaking. Along the bumpy dirt road, dew still glistening on the leaves. The village of Bhandari was bigger, noisier. Women carried baskets of produce on their heads, children ran barefoot, and vendors shouted prices with theatrical flair. Amar kept his head low beneath a scarf, his good eye scanning the ground. The more people around, the more invisible he tried to become. As Joseph unloaded the sacks behind the small health post, a young man in a white coat approached them. "You're Joseph, right?" he asked politely. "The nurse told us you'd be coming today." Joseph looked wary. Yes? The man smiled and gestured toward the modest clinic. Dr. Srihari is inside. He'd like to speak with you. Both of you, if that's all right. Amar felt his stomach tighten. He didn't like surprises. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and eucalyptus oil. Posters about malaria and tuberculosis lined the faded yellow walls. They were led into a small examination room, where a man in his 40s stood reviewing charts. He wore a buttoned shirt, wire-rimmed glasses, and had the calm authority of someone used to seeing pain up close. You must be Amar, he said gently, turning to face him. His voice was warm, unjudging. Thank you for coming. Amar said nothing. I'm Dr. Srihari Jangala. I run this clinic and travel to smaller villages as part of a rural outreach program. A nurse mentioned your condition last week. I asked her to see if you might stop by. Joseph nodded slowly. We didn't know you'd be here. That's all right, the doctor said. Would it be okay if I took a look? Amar looked at Joseph, uncertain. You don't have to say yes, Joseph said softly, but maybe just listen. Amar slowly removed the scarf. The doctor didn't flinch. He stepped forward, examining the swelling with quiet focus, palpating the edges of the mass, asking Amar to blink, to breathe, to describe any pain or numbness. Amar spoke little, only answering when necessary. Finally, Dr. Srihari sat back. Have you ever had a scan? X-ray, CT, anything? Amar shook his head. Do you know what this is? No one's ever said. Dr. Hari nodded thoughtfully. I can't make a full diagnosis here, but from what I see, this may be a type of ossifying fibroma. It's a tumor, yes, but it's likely benign. Amar's eye narrowed. So, not cancer? Correct. But that doesn't mean it's safe. It's growing. And from the way it's pressing on your eye and cheekbone, it could threaten your vision, your ability to breathe, even your brain. Joseph's face paled. What can be done? He asked quietly. Dr. Hari hesitated, choosing his words. There's a hospital in Kochi, Amrita Institute. They have a surgical team with experience in complex craniofacial cases. I know a surgeon there. I can make the referral. Amar looked down. We don't have money for that. It would be covered, Dr. Hari said. There's a foundation that sponsors cases like this. Amar shook his head. I've lived like this for 6 years. I'm used to it. Used to it, Joseph repeated, voice trembling. Is that what you want? To survive another 6 years like this? Amar said nothing. Dr. Hari leaned forward, his tone softer now. You're not just surviving, Amar. You're hiding. This isn't just about removing a tumor. It's about giving you back the life you were supposed to have. Silence stretched between them. Amar stood. I need air. Outside, the sun was higher now, and the streets bustled with life. Amar walked to a nearby well and sat on the stone edge. The village kids played nearby, oblivious. He stared at his reflection in the water. The ripples made the tumor seem even larger, more grotesque. He hated that he cared. He hated that he wanted it gone. Minutes passed. Then Joseph appeared beside him, carrying a bottle of water and a small packet of biscuits. I know you're scared, Joseph said. I'd be too. But if there's even a chance you could live without this pain, shouldn't you try? Amar didn't answer. You once told me, Joseph continued, that you'd give anything to see your mother again. To ask her what you should do. Well, she's not here, but I am, and I'm telling you, it's time. Amar looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel angry. He felt tired, tired of hiding, tired of the stares, tired of the mirror he couldn't face. He exhaled. Okay. The train ride to Kochi took over 20 hours. It was hot, noisy, and cramped, but Amar barely noticed. His mind was too loud. He sat by the window of the sleeper car, head resting against the metal bars, watching the fields blur into rivers and the rivers into cities. Joseph sat across from him, reading a worn book and sipping weak chai from a plastic cup. Every so often, he'd glance at Amar, as if to make sure he was still there. Neither of them had slept much the night before. When the letter from Amrita Institute arrived confirming Amar's appointment, it felt like a distant dream. A formal referral from Dr. Srihari, signed and sealed, with travel arrangements and instructions. It was all moving too fast. Amar hadn't told anyone else in the village. What would he even say? I'm going to get a new face? I'm going to let strangers cut open my skull? No, he didn't owe them anything. He'd spent too many years being their secret shame. As the train rattled over a narrow bridge, Amar caught his reflection in the window. The swollen mass still hung over his cheek and eye like a parasite. His good eye stared back at him, full of questions. Would he survive? Would he still be himself? Would he even recognize the face that came back from this? The train lurched, jolting him back to the present. A boy selling samosas brushed past, shouting prices. Amar waved him off. His appetite had vanished the moment they boarded. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city lights of Kochi began to flicker, in the distance, Yosef reached across the table and gently tapped his hand. "We're here," he said. Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences loomed like a city unto itself. Tall white buildings, wide glass windows, nurses in pristine uniforms. Patients moving through corridors, like the veins of a machine. Amar had never seen anything like it. He clung to Joseph's side as they entered through the outpatient wing. Everything smelled clean and artificial, disinfectant and air conditioning, too perfect, too foreign. A nurse escorted them to a consultation room on the 6th floor. Amar's legs felt numb, not from the climb but from the weight of what was about to happen. 10 minutes passed. Then the door opened. Dr. Subramanya Iyer walked in with quiet command. He was tall, lean, with a neatly trimmed beard and sharp eyes that seemed to read more than you said. His white coat bore his name in crisp blue embroidery. Amar had expected someone older, maybe slower, but there was a confidence in Dr. Iyer's stride that made him nervous. "Amar?" the doctor asked with a smile. "Good to see you." Amar nodded stiffly. Dr. Iyer pulled up a chair and sat, his hands folded neatly. "I've read your case. Quite a journey you've been through already." He turned to Joseph. "And you must be his uncle. Thank you for bringing him here." Joseph gave a small nod. He didn't speak much in English, but his eyes were watchful. Dr. Iyer looked back to Amar. "What you have is known as an ossifying fibroma. It's benign, which means non-cancerous, but that doesn't mean it's harmless. In your case, it's growing aggressively. If we don't intervene soon, it could press further into the base of your skull, compress your airway, and potentially your brain." Amar felt his mouth go dry. "The good news," Dr. Iyer continued, "is that it can't be removed. It will be a long surgery, very complex, but it's possible." "How long?" Amar asked, his voice hoarse. 14 to 16 hours, the doctor said. "We'll need a multidisciplinary team. Craniofacial surgeons, neurospecialists, reconstruction experts. We've already done a 3D scan of your skull structure. I'll show you." He stood and motioned toward a monitor. On the screen appeared a 3D rendering of Amar's skull. Even in digital form, the tumor looked monstrous. It bulged from the upper jaw, distorting the entire left side. "This," Dr. Iyer pointed, "is the area we'll remove. We'll then reconstruct the facial structure using titanium mesh and bone grafts from your hip or leg. It's precise work, high risk, but we've done similar cases before." "Has anyone died during this?" Amar asked. Dr. Iyer didn't dodge the question. Every surgery carries risk, but the bigger risk is doing nothing. Without treatment, your airway will eventually collapse. The tumor will continue to grow. It's only a matter of time. Amar leaned back, staring at the model. He felt weightless and heavy at once, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff with wind howling in both directions. "What if I don't recognize myself?" he whispered. Dr. Iyer's voice softened. "You might not at first, but you'll still be you, just with more choices, more air in your lungs, more space in your life." For the first time, Amar felt something shift inside him, not just fear, but maybe the outline of hope. They were given a small room on the 4th floor of the patient wing. It had 2 beds, a small fan, and a window that overlooked the city. Amar stood by that window for most of the day, staring down at the endless traffic, watching people move like ants between buildings. There were no curious eyes here, no whispers, just strangers who didn't know his name. That, strangely, was a kind of peace. Dr. Iyer had scheduled the surgery for the end of the week, 3 days to prepare, blood tests, imaging, meetings with anesthesiologists, speech therapists, plastic surgeons. Amar felt like he was being handed from one pair of hands to another, each person studying a different piece of him. No one looked at him the way villagers did. They looked at him like a puzzle, a challenge, a life worth saving. On the 2nd day, Yosef bought a notebook from the hospital gift shop and gave it to Amar. "In case you want to write something," he said. Before, you know. Amar didn't answer, but that night when Joseph was asleep, he sat by the window and opened the first page. He wrote, "If I don't wake up tomorrow, I want someone to know. I tried. I didn't run this time. I showed up, and maybe that counts for something." He stared at the words for a long time. Then he kept writing. He wrote about his mother, her laugh, the way she sang to him when he had nightmares. He wrote about the boys at school, the girl who cried when she saw his face. He wrote about Joseph, about the way the old man always stood in front of him when others stared too long. He wrote about the mirror, the one he broke, the one he couldn't forget. Later that night he dreamed of water. He was sinking into a lake, deeper and deeper. His face was clear, clean, but his chest was heavy. He looked up and saw his mother standing on the surface, reaching out with both hands. He tried to reach back, but something held him down. When he woke, his pillow was damp. He wasn't sure if it was sweat or tears. The day before surgery, Dr. Iyer visited them again. "You'll be first on the schedule," he said. "We'll begin early. There'll be a lot of people in the room, but I'll be leading. You'll be asleep the whole time. When you wake up, you'll feel sore, disoriented. But we'll be here." Amar nodded. He was too tired to ask more questions, too scared to pretend he wasn't. After the doctor left, Joseph cooked rice and lentils on the small electric stove provided by the hospital. Amar barely touched his plate. "You need to eat," Joseph said. "I can't," Amar whispered. Joseph didn't press. He sat on his own bed, picked up his rosary, and began to pray softly. Amar listened to the rhythm of his uncle's voice, steady like the waves in his dream. When the lights went out, Amar sat by the window again. He opened the notebook one last time. "If I wake up, I want to look in the mirror and not be afraid. Not because I'll be handsome, not because the tumor will be gone, but because I'll know I did something impossible." He closed the notebook, held it to his chest, and for the first time in years whispered a prayer. He didn't ask for survival. He asked for peace. At 4:30 a.m. the nurse arrived with a wheelchair. Amar didn't speak. He let them help him into the gown. Let Joseph tie the strings behind his back. When they rolled him down the corridor, fluorescent lights blinking above, he felt like he was floating, or maybe sinking. Joseph walked beside him, silent. Just before the double doors to the operating theater, the nurse stopped. "This is where we say goodbye," she said gently. Joseph leaned down, placed a hand on Amar's shoulder. "You're not alone in there," he said. "I'll be right here, waiting." Amar nodded, gripping his uncle's hand for just one extra second. Then he let go. The doors swung open. The light inside was blinding. The operating theater was quiet. Too quiet. It was 5:45 a.m. The surgical team had already gathered. 12 people in total. 2 anesthesiologists, 3 craniofacial surgeons, 1 neurosurgeon, 2 ENT specialists, a maxillofacial expert, and support nurses, all moving with rehearsed precision. Dr. Iyer stood at the head of the table, arms folded across his chest, eyes fixed on the monitor showing Amar's 3D cranial scan. The boy hadn't arrived yet. A nurse checked the clock. They should be wheeling him in any minute now. Dr. Iyer didn't respond. He was focused, yes, but also aware of the weight this morning carried. Amar's case was unlike anything he'd ever taken on. The size, the location, the complexity. It was the kind of challenge that could make or break a reputation. But this wasn't about reputation. It was about giving a 19-year-old his life back. He took a slow breath and murmured to himself, "No mistakes today." The doors hissed open. The gurney rolled in, flanked by 2 nurses and Joseph, who had somehow convinced the staff to let him walk Amar down the hallway. Joseph's eyes were red from lack of sleep. His hand never left Amar's shoulder. Amar was pale. He hadn't spoken since leaving the patient room, but his eyes were open, alert, searching the room as if memorizing the faces of the people who might decide his fate. Dr. Iyer stepped forward. "Good morning, Amar." Amar blinked slowly, then gave the smallest of nods. "We're ready when you are," Dr. Iyer said. "You'll be asleep before we begin. No pain, no dreams, just rest. When you wake up, it'll all be behind you." Amar's lips trembled, but he didn't speak. The nurse guided Joseph gently back toward the doors. "I'll be here," Joseph said one last time. "Don't be afraid." Amar watched him go. Then he closed his eyes. The anesthesia team moved in. 1 inserted and 4 into the crook of Amar's arm. Another fitted a mask gently over his mouth and nose. Just breathe normally, the voice said. Amar's heartbeat began to slow. His fingers twitched. Then nothing. Monitors beeped. The lines on the screen danced and steadied. He's under, said the lead anesthesiologist. Vitals are stable. Dr. Iyer pulled on his surgical gloves, his movements methodical. He glanced at the 3D model one last time, then looked down at Amar's face, distorted, swollen, alien. And yet, beneath it all, there was still something undeniably human, fragile, worth saving. Scalpel, he said. The first incision began. Outside, Joseph sat alone in the waiting room. The light from the windows had changed from blue to gold. He clasped his hands, thumb rubbing circles over the worn wooden cross he wore around his neck. He wasn't a religious man, not in the traditional sense. But today, he prayed. Prayed not for a miracle, just for time, for mercy, for another chance to tell the boy that he mattered. Hours passed. In the OR, the team worked like clockwork. They began by peeling back the layers of tissue, navigating carefully around nerves and arteries. Every movement was deliberate, every cut rehearsed. The tumor was larger than expected. It had wrapped itself around the upper jaw, extending dangerously close to the orbital floor of the eye and pushing into the sinus cavity. Removing it would require severing bone in 3 locations. Bring in the drill, Dr. Iyer said. The whine of the surgical drill echoed through the room. Sweat beaded beneath his goggles. His hands didn't shake. They never did. But his jaw was clenched tighter than usual. Watch that artery, one of the assistants murmured. Already on it, Dr. Iyer replied. Blood pooled for a moment before being suctioned away. The heart monitor continued its steady rhythm, tick, 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 like a metronome keeping time in the background. They were 5 hours in, still no signs of major complications, but the hardest part was yet to come. 7 hours into the surgery, something changed. The removal had progressed slowly but steadily. The mass had been cut free in sections, each fragment carefully extracted and placed in the surgical tray. By the time they reached the deepest layer, where the tumor pressed near the skull base, Dr. Iyer could already feel the physical toll wearing on him. His hands were steady, but his back ached and his eyes burned behind the goggles. Then the monitor beeped, sharper, faster. BP dropping, one of the anesthesiologists said, urgency in his tone. 70% over 30%. Heart rate falling. Dr. Iyer froze mid-motion. Pause, he ordered. Clamp the line. Get me a reading. The assistant nurse adjusted the equipment, but the numbers kept falling. Is it bleeding? Someone asked. No visible hemorrhage, Dr. Iyer replied. Could be a reaction. Or a vascular collapse. His lips are cyanotic. Start epinephrine. Push fluids. Prep defib just in case. Inside the room, a practiced calm fell over the team, but behind every step was tension so thick it could be sliced with a scalpel. Dr. Iyer leaned in. Amar's skin was pale. Sweat pooled beneath his neck. The rhythm on the heart monitor turned erratic. Talk to me, he muttered. We're losing pressure. 40 over 20. Then the long tone. That terrible, unwavering tone that announced the heart's betrayal. Flatline. The room contracted into silence. Charge paddles, someone called. Clear, came the order. A jolt of electricity surged through Amar's body. Nothing. Again. They shocked him a second time. Still nothing. Joseph sat in the waiting area, holding his rosary, when he felt a sudden chill. He looked up, but there was no breeze. Just that sense, deep, ancestral, that something was wrong. Back in the OR, time bent. Dr. Iyer leaned over Amar's lifeless chest, sweat dripping onto the sterile drape. One more time, he said, quieter now, clear. In the dark, Amar stood at the edge of a lake. The water shimmered silver beneath a sky without stars. Everything was quiet, still. He felt light, not weightless, but free. His face didn't hurt. He reached up and touched it, smooth skin, whole, warm, no tumor, no shame. He heard laughter behind him. Turning, he saw a woman standing at the edge of the water, dressed in a red cotton sari. Her hair was long and unbound, just like in his earliest memories. She smiled as if no time had passed. Ma, he whispered. She opened her arms. Amar stepped forward, the water lapping at his feet. It's okay, she said. You've done enough. You can rest. Tears welled in his eyes. The lake pulled at his legs, urging him deeper. The water was warm, inviting. I missed you, he said. She smiled again. I know. He took another step, then another. The sky brightened, just slightly, and then he heard another voice, fainter. From behind, Amar. He turned. A figure stood in the distance, shorter, older. Joseph. Come back, the voice said. I'm still here. The lake felt colder now. The water began to rise. His heart, where it should have been still, started to pound again. He looked at his mother. Her expression softened. It's your choice, she said, but if you go now, you'll never know what was waiting. He looked down at the smooth water one last time, then turned, and ran. On the heart monitors screamed back to life. Sinus rhythm returning, the anesthesiologist shouted. BP climbing, 60/40 and rising. A collective gasp swept the room. Dr. Iyer closed his eyes for a split second, then snapped back into action. Prep blood. Reassess vitals. Let's keep moving, we've still got hours left. As the others scrambled to stabilize Amar, Dr. Iyer allowed himself a rare pause. His shoulders slumped just slightly. He looked at the boy on the table, alive somehow, when he shouldn't have been. Stubborn kid, he muttered under his breath. And then, back to work. There was still a face to rebuild. 9 hours had passed. The worst of the tumor was gone, now lying in a sealed tray on the side table, 5 kilograms of bone, fibrous tissue, and weight that had once hung from Amar's face like a curse. What remained was raw, hollowed-out bone, exposed nerves, and a space where half a face used to be. Dr. Iyer removed his gloves and stepped back. We're through with the excision, he said. Vitals stable, minimal bleeding, time to rebuild. The team moved into Phase 2. A technician rolled in the 3D model, a life-sized replica of Amar's skull, printed from imaging done weeks earlier. On the table beside it sat titanium plates, mesh frameworks, sterile screws, and harvested bone grafts from Amar's hip. Precision was key now. Every millimeter mattered. They began aligning the plates, matching them to the contours of the original model. Slowly, piece by piece, Amar's face began to take shape again, not the exact face he was born with, but something new, something close, something human. Adjust the infraorbital rim, Dr. Iyer instructed. Slightly higher on the left. Graft set, one assistant said. Fixing mesh, at zygomatic arch. Each screw went in with a tiny click, each suture with silent reverence. The atmosphere in the OR had shifted. The fear was still there, but now it was laced with awe. Not because they were doing something miraculous, but because, somehow, the boy on the table had made it this far. 12 hours in, Dr. Iyer's gloves were stained red, his shoulders stiff, but his focus had never faltered. Start closing the soft tissue, he said. Use the vascularized flap from the thigh. Let's give him symmetry. Nurses moved quickly, preparing the final layers, skin grafts, muscle stitching. The delicate work that would determine not just function, but identity. By hour 13, the OR lights dimmed slightly. The noise had died down. No more drilling, no more alarms, only the sound of sutures and quiet breathing. Then Dr. Iyer stepped back for the last time. The face on the table wasn't perfect. Swollen, bruised, stitched across the left side. But it was a face, not a mass, not a mask. A face, and it looked back at him in stillness, as if waiting to be woken. He peeled off his gloves slowly. He's going to need more work, he said. Dental implants, eyelid correction, physical therapy. But he'll live, one of the surgeons murmured. Dr. Iyer nodded. He'll live. Outside, Joseph sat slumped on the bench, his hands folded tightly together. Eyes fixed on the red surgery in progress sign above the double doors. 12 hours had turned into 14. He had counted every minute. The nurses brought him tea. He didn't drink it. A janitor passed by and offered him a blanket. He didn't notice. All he could do was pray. For breath. For another chance. For a second sunrise. When the doors finally opened, it was nearly midnight. Dr. Iyer stepped out first, pulling down his mask. Joseph stood up, his legs numb. Well? He asked, barely breathing. Dr. Iyer gave a tired smile. He made it. Joseph staggered forward, grabbing the doctor's hands. Thank you, he whispered, over and over. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Iyer didn't pull away. He just nodded, his voice hoarse. He fought. Harder than anyone I've seen. Can I see him? Not yet. He's in recovery. But soon. Joseph looked down the hallway, where a nurse was wheeling Amar away. wrapped in layers of gauze and wires. He didn't look like the boy Joseph had raised, but something told him Amar was still in there, still holding on. Inside the recovery room, Amar lay still. His breathing was slow, assisted by a machine, but his heart was steady. Beside his bed sat the notebook Joseph had packed in his bag, the one Amar had written in the night before. It rested on the tray table, closed but heavy with words. A new story was beginning, and though Amar couldn't speak yet, he had survived long enough to write the next page. The first thing Amar felt was the weight, not the weight of the tumor. That was gone. This was different, heavier somehow, thicker than blankets, denser than bandages. He tried to open his eyes, but only one responded. The other remained sealed shut, padded with layers of gauze and tape. A low mechanical hum filled the room, steady and rhythmic, the sound of machines keeping him tethered to life. Somewhere nearby, a chair creaked. Amar? The voice was cracked and soft. Joseph. Amar turned his head slightly, and even that simple motion sent waves of ache through his skull, jaw, and neck. Every part of him felt stitched together with thread and fire. You're awake, Joseph whispered. Thank God. A nurse stepped in quickly, checking monitors, adjusting tubes, jotting numbers on a clipboard. She smiled at Amar. Welcome back, she said gently. You've been out for almost 12 hours. Amar tried to speak, but no words came, just a dry rasp. Don't worry, she said. Your throat's sore from the breathing tube. That'll pass. Do you understand me? He nodded slightly. Joseph stood, stepping closer, eyes shimmering. You did it, Beta, he said. You're alive. Amar closed his eyes again, letting the words settle over him like fog. He wanted to feel something, relief, joy, anything. But all he could muster was exhaustion. They let him rest for another day before attempting to move him. A physical therapist came in with soft encouragement and careful hands. Joseph helped too, supporting his back as they raised the bed. The first time Amar sat up, he nearly blacked out. His body was foreign, not just sore but changed. His face felt lighter, too light, hollow in places it had never been, swollen elsewhere, and beneath it all, something missing. By the third day, he could sip water on his own. By the fifth, he could speak, barely. Words came like pebbles in the throat, rough and uncertain. On the sixth morning, Dr. Iyer returned. How are we feeling today? He asked with a smile. Amar didn't answer at first. I feel strange, he said finally. That's normal, the doctor replied. You've gone through a major reconstruction. Your brain's adjusting to the new structure, nerve pathways, facial tension, spatial balance. It'll take time. Amar looked away. Joseph sat nearby, clutching a thermos of tea, watching both men closely. Can I see it? Amar asked quietly. Dr. Iyer hesitated. We usually wait until the swelling reduces, he said. But if you're ready. Amar nodded. The doctor gestured to the nurse, who returned moments later with a small hand mirror. She held it, but Amar didn't take it right away. His eyes fixated on the frame, then the glass, then his own bandaged reflection. Not yet, he whispered. Whenever you're ready, the nurse said, placing it on the side table. When they left, Amar turned to Joseph. Is it bad? Joseph shook his head. It's different, but it's you. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Silence settled between them. Later that evening, a young boy from the next recovery room came to visit with his mother. He had just had a cleft palate repair and walked with a curious limp. Is he the one with the big tumor? The boy asked, too young to censor his words. His mother scolded him, embarrassed, but Amar simply smiled. I was, he said. The boy peered at the gauze on his face. Does it hurt? Amar nodded, a little. Do you feel better now? He paused. Not yet. The boy thought about that. Maybe tomorrow, he said, then waddled away. Joseph chuckled. Out of the mouths of children. Amar didn't respond. He touched the edge of the mirror on the side table but didn't lift it. Not yet. That night, sleep came in fragments. In dreams, he saw himself walking through the village again, but this time no one looked away, no one flinched. A little girl handed him a flower and said, You look like someone I know. Then he looked down and realized he didn't have a face at all. Just light. He woke with a start, sweat gathering at the base of his neck. Joseph stirred in the chair. Bad dream? Amar wiped his brow. I don't know. In the following days, nurses removed the larger bandages. A few stitches remained. The swelling had begun to reduce. Amar started walking short distances in the hallway. Each time he passed a reflective surface, he turned away. He wasn't ready. He had lived so long seeing the tumor as his face, his identity, his burden. Now it was gone, and what remained felt like a stranger. It was on the 10th day of recovery that Dr. Iyer returned with test results in hand. He entered Amar's room quietly, carrying a manila folder marked with red ink and a small stack of printed scans. Yosef sat near the window, reading the newspaper. Amar was awake, sipping soup from a plastic bowl. The swelling in his face had gone down significantly. He still hadn't looked in the mirror. Dr. Iyer greeted them both and took a seat. "I wanted to wait until you were stronger," he said. "But we've received the final pathology report. There's something we need to talk about." Amar straightened in bed, suddenly alert. Yosef put down the paper. Dr. Iyer opened the folder and pulled out a page with charts and a small diagram of the human neck. "While removing the facial tumor, we noticed an abnormality in your parathyroid gland," he explained. "It's a small gland near the thyroid that regulates calcium in your body. We took a biopsy. It came back as a parathyroid adenoma, a non-cancerous growth, but that's not the whole story." He paused, letting the words land. "Based on your scans, your tumor behavior, and this growth, we believe you may have a rare genetic condition called hyperparathyroidism jaw tumor syndrome, HPTJT." Amar blinked. "What does that mean?" "It's a hereditary syndrome," Dr. Iyer said carefully. "Very rare. Fewer than 70 documented cases worldwide. It causes the parathyroid glands to become overactive, which in turn causes calcium imbalances. In some people, it can also trigger ossifying fibromas in the jaw, like the one you had." Joseph leaned forward. "Is it dangerous?" "It can be," Dr. Iyer admitted. "If left untreated, it may lead to kidney issues, more tumors, even certain cancers. But now that we've removed the gland and confirmed the diagnosis, we can monitor and manage it. Regular checkups, blood work, imaging." Amar's voice was flat. "So I'm not just unlucky, I'm built wrong." "No," Dr. Iyer said quickly. "You're not built wrong. Your body has a mutation. That doesn't define who you are. But it explains everything, doesn't it?" Amar said, eyes darkening. "Why the tumor happened, why it grew the way it did. It wasn't just bad luck. It was written in me." Silence settled over the room. Joseph looked like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Dr. Iyer leaned forward. "Listen to me, Amar. You are not a mistake. What happened to you isn't your fault, and this syndrome doesn't decide your future. It's just knowledge. Now we know how to protect you going forward." "But I don't want to be a medical case," Amar said, almost shouting now. "I don't want to be in a journal. I don't want to be the rare boy from the village with a record-breaking tumor. I just want to be normal." Dr. Iyer's face softened. "You've been through hell. You're allowed to feel that way. But being rare doesn't mean being broken. Sometimes it means being chosen, to survive things others can't." Amar looked away, jaw clenched. He hated that word, rare. Rare meant headlines, pity, asterisks next to your name. He didn't want to be inspiration porn. He didn't want to be that boy. After the doctor left, Yosef tried to lighten the mood by telling a story from Amar's childhood, about a time he chased a rooster into a neighbor's kitchen and got stuck behind a water barrel for 2 hours. Amar didn't laugh. That night he sat up in bed, staring at the mirror on the side table. Still untouched, still waiting. He reached for it, then pulled his hand back. Too soon. Too raw. He opened the notebook instead and began to write. "They say I'm rare. Rare like a diamond, or rare like a disease. Everyone wants to look, but no one wants to be one." He stopped, closed the book. He felt tears build behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. 2 days later, the media arrived. A small local reporter, then a regional channel. News of his surgery had leaked, how one of the largest ossifying fibromas ever recorded had been removed by a top surgical team. The photos, the 3D renderings, the headlines wrote themselves. Amar refused to meet them. He stayed in his room with the curtains closed. "They don't care about me," he said to Joseph. "They care about my face, my before and after, like I'm a circus act." "You don't have to talk to them," Joseph said gently. "But maybe someday, telling your story could help someone else." Amar shook his head. "I'm not ready." Later that night, he overheard 2 nurses talking outside his room. "He's the one, right? The boy with the rare syndrome? Yeah, poor thing. At least now he looks normal. He bit down on the inside of his cheek until it bled. The next morning, he asked the nurse to remove the mirror. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," Amar said, voice steady. "I don't want to see someone I don't recognize." The newspapers called him the miracle boy. Some headlines said he cheated death. Others hailed him as India's rarest case. One article even ran side-by-side images, before and after, with bright red arrows and percentages about facial symmetry. They spoke of the doctors, the breakthrough, the syndrome. They never mentioned Amar's name until the third paragraph. He read none of it, but the clippings still made their way into his room. Nurses left them on his bedside table, thinking he might be proud. Journalists loitered near the lobby, whispering to one another when he passed by with his hood up and his head down. Everyone wanted a quote, a photo, a smile. He gave them none of it. On the 12th day after surgery, a team from a national news network requested a filmed interview. "We want to inspire people," the producer said over the phone. "Your story is powerful. We'd love to have you speak. Just a few words." Amar said no. When the hospital's PR team tried to persuade him, citing the importance of awareness and visibility, Amar stared at the floor and replied, "You had your photo. Let that be enough." Later that evening, Joseph sat beside him, spooning lentils into a bowl without a word. "I know you're angry," he said finally. Amar didn't respond. "But hiding isn't healing." Amar turned his head sharply. "I'm not hiding. I'm just tired of being their project." "They're just people," Joseph said gently. "They don't know how to see you yet." "They don't want to see me," Amar snapped. "They want the idea of me. The boy with the biggest tumor. The orphan with the tragic face. I'm just content to them. Something to cry over, then scroll past." Joseph sat back, rubbing his hands together. "You've been through something no one else can understand," he said. "But that doesn't mean no one wants to try." Amar looked down at his hands, thinner now, bruised with healing 4 marks. "I didn't survive to become an example," he murmured. "I survived because I didn't have a choice." The words lingered. Joseph didn't push further. But that night, as Amar lay awake staring at the ceiling, he wondered if maybe, deep down, he had wanted to be an example, or at least, to matter. The hospital discharged him on the 15th day. Dr. Iyer gave him a full list of follow-ups, rehab appointments, therapy sessions. They would begin reconstructive dental work soon. For now, Amar was advised to avoid mirrors, bright light, and public attention. He followed 2 of the 3 instructions. Outside the hospital gates, a group of medical students had gathered. One of them recognized Amar as he stepped into the auto rickshaw beside Joseph. "That's him," someone whispered. "The jaw case." Amar flinched and turned away. Joseph put a hand on his back. "Let's go home." They didn't go back to Kalunga, not yet. Instead, they rented a small room in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Kochi, closer to the hospital. It was sparse, just a bed, a table, and a window that looked out onto the back of a temple courtyard. Every morning, Amar woke to the sound of bells and chanting. It should have been peaceful. It wasn't. He found himself withdrawing more each day. He barely spoke to Joseph. He stopped writing in the notebook. He walked with his hood up, his shoulders curled, as if still protecting the tumor that no longer existed. One afternoon, Joseph returned from the market to find Amar sitting at the edge of the bed, unmoving. "I'm not getting better," Amar said quietly. Joseph placed the groceries down. "Your body's healing. My body's confused. My head doesn't know what face it lives in anymore." Joseph didn't answer. He simply sat down beside him and said, "I still see you." Amar looked up, and for a moment there was something like pleading in his eyes. "Do you?" he whispered. "Because I don't." The idea wasn't Amar's, it was Joseph's. "You've spent enough time behind the curtain," he said one morning over breakfast. "Maybe it's time you stepped out." "I'm not ready," Amar replied, pushing rice around on his plate. "You're not being asked to speak to reporters. Just come with me, one afternoon. No one needs to know your name." Amar hesitated. "What for?" "There's a boy at the hospital, 12 years old. Another facial case. They say he cries every time the nurses come near." "I'm not a counselor," Amar said flatly. "No," Joseph agreed. "You're a survivor." That word still made Amar wince. But that afternoon, something shifted. They returned to Amrita Institute, not through the emergency entrance, not into surgery, but through the pediatric ward. Amar kept his hood up as they passed nurses and young patients. No one paid him any special attention. It felt strange, freeing. Joseph led him to a small room with sea-green walls and cartoon stickers peeling from the corners. Inside, a boy sat on the bed, face half covered in medical tape, one eye swollen shut. He didn't look up as they entered. "This is Amar," Joseph said. "He's here to say hi." The boy said nothing. Amar stood by the door, unsure of what to do. He could feel the old instincts crawling back. Hide your face, speak less, take up less space. But he pushed them down. He took a step forward. "You know," he said carefully, "when I was your age, I used to think the hospital was a kind of prison." The boy didn't move. "I thought every hallway was just another way to trap you, and every doctor just wanted to poke you like you were a science project." The boy blinked. "But then someone told me," Amar continued, "that sometimes you have to be taken apart before you can be put back together." A long silence followed. Then the boy whispered, "Did it hurt?" Amar knelt beside the bed. "Yes," he said, "but not the way you think." That was the only conversation they had. But the next day, the boy asked the nurse when Amar was coming back. So Amar came again, and again, not just for that boy, but for others too. A girl with cleft palate surgery, a teenager recovering from burns, a child with a feeding tube who hadn't smiled in weeks. They didn't need speeches. They just needed someone who had been there. Amar didn't speak much. He didn't need to. Sometimes he sat silently with them, playing cards, sharing stories, drawing sketches in the margins of his old notebook. One afternoon, as he walked through the recovery wing, a nurse called to him. "There's someone you might want to meet," she said. "Room 218. Inside was a girl, no more than 8, with a birthmark that covered half her face and neck. She sat in bed with a stuffed elephant clutched to her chest, her dark hair tied in a single braid. Her mother stood in the corner, anxious, protective. Amar entered slowly. The girl stared. "Hi," he said. "You're the one with the big face tumor," she said bluntly. Amar blinked, then smiled. "Used to be," he said. "Did they fix you?" "Kind of." She tilted her head. "Are you still scared?" Amar paused. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Me too," she said. Then she reached out and touched the left side of his face, gently, innocently, right where the tumor had once been. Her hand was small, her eyes were wide and unafraid. "You're not scary," she said, and something broke open inside him, not pain, not shame, but something warm, soft, forgiving. That night when they returned home, Joseph made tea and sat beside Amar on the porch. "How was it?" he asked. Amar didn't speak for a while. Then he whispered, "She touched my face." Joseph smiled. "And?" Amar looked at him, eyes brighter than they'd been in weeks. "I didn't flinch." The mirror had waited long enough. It sat, dusty, at the corner of the dresser in their small rental room. Unused, untouched. Joseph had cleaned it weeks ago but never forced Amar to look. It was always Amar's choice, and tonight he chose. He stood in front of it after Joseph had gone to sleep, the room lit only by a dim bedside lamp. The fan spun lazily overhead, humming like a lullaby. Outside, a stray dog barked somewhere in the alley. Amar's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the mirror. He stared at the frame first, then the edges, then the glass, and finally, himself. At first, the image was alien. The left side of his face was still pink in some areas, marked by faint scarring and the subtle unevenness of new tissues settling in. The eye socket looked fuller, shaped with surgical precision. The jawline was sharper, no longer drooping under the weight of something unnatural. He touched his cheek, then his temple, then the edge of his mouth. The boy in the mirror didn't look like the Amar from before, but he didn't look broken either. His good eye, now paired with its long-forgotten twin, stared back, not in confusion or fear, but in recognition, tentative, honest. And for the first time since the operation, Amar didn't look away. He didn't flinch, he didn't cry, he just looked and breathed. "I'm still here," he whispered. Not to anyone in the room, but to himself, to the boy in the reflection, to the version of Amar who had lived with the tumor, with the shame, with the silence. "I carried you," he said softly, "but you don't have to carry me anymore." He stepped back and sat on the edge of the bed. The mirror leaned slightly, still tilted at an angle, but the image remained. The same. He reached under the bed and pulled out the old notebook. There, tucked inside the cover, was something wrapped in cloth, the shard. The broken piece of mirror Joseph had saved years ago, the one Amar had. shattered as a boy when he could no longer bear to see his reflection. He unwrapped it slowly, carefully. The glass was jagged, still stained faintly with dust and time. He held it in one hand, the new mirror in the other. Then he stood up. He walked outside, barefoot, down the stone steps of the building, out into the alley. The air was cool. Night had settled fully, and the temple bells had long gone silent. He walked to the trash bin at the end of the lane. He looked at the shard one last time, then let it fall. The sound it made was small, anticlimactic, even, but Amar felt something lift from his chest. Not a dramatic transformation, not a thunderclap, just space. He stood there for a moment longer, staring into the shadows, then turned and walked back inside. In the morning, Joseph found him sitting by the window sipping tea. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Amar smiled, faintly. "I slept better than I have in years." Joseph nodded. "You looked in the mirror." "I did." "And?" Amar exhaled. "I saw someone who's not afraid to be seen." Later that week, a letter arrived from the hospital. An invitation. Dr. Iyer was hosting a medical symposium on rare facial tumors. They wanted Amar to attend, not as a patient, not even as a case study, but as a guest, as a voice. Joseph handed him the envelope. Amar didn't open it right away. He stared at it for a long time, then placed it on the table. "I'll think about it," he said, and for the first time, he meant it. The auditorium was quiet, not silent, but the kind of quiet that comes when a room is waiting for something that matters. Rows of doctors, students, and health professionals filled the seats. White coats rustled softly, notebooks were opened, pens clicked into readiness. On the large screen behind the podium glowed the title of the day's symposium, Faces of Resilience, Rare Cases, Human Stories. Among the panelists sat Dr. Subramania Iyer, composed as always, hands clasped in his lap. He didn't look nervous, but if one looked close enough, there was pride hiding in the stillness of his jaw. Beside him, Amar sat in a tailored shirt, his collar neat, his shoulders upright. His left cheek still held traces of surgical scar tissue, but his face was whole, alive, expressive. And finally he had said yes to the invitation, not because he wanted to be on stage, but because, after everything, he had something to say. Dr. Iyer introduced him briefly, keeping it simple. "Some patients teach us more than textbooks ever could," he said. "And some stories rewrite how we practice medicine." Polite applause followed. Amar approached the microphone slowly, scanning the crowd. He cleared his throat, paused, then began. "When I was 13, a small swelling appeared on the side of my face. We thought it was an infection, maybe a tooth problem, something simple. By the time I was 15, I had stopped going to school. By 16, I stopped going outside. I stopped looking in mirrors. And eventually, I stopped thinking of myself as a person others could look at." He let the words hang, unfiltered. "I lived like that for 6 years. I wasn't waiting to be saved. I didn't believe anyone would. When my tumor grew, it didn't just disfigure my face. It disfigured how I saw the world. I thought I was a burden, an embarrassment, a mistake." Several audience members shifted in their seats. "I got used to being invisible," he said. "But pain has a way of reminding you that you still exist." He looked over at Dr. Iyer, then smiled slightly. "When I was finally referred to Amrita Institute, I didn't come here hoping for a new face. I came because someone I trusted, my uncle, believed I deserved a chance, even when I didn't believe it myself." His voice grew stronger. "And the people in this room, surgeons, nurses, anesthetists, you didn't just cut away a tumor. You gave me back something much harder to reconstruct. You gave me back the right to be seen." The room was completely still now. "No one talks about what happens after the surgery," Amar continued. "No one tells you how strange it is to look in the mirror and not recognize yourself. How hard it is to trust your reflection again, to believe you're allowed to take up space." A soft breath rippled through the audience. He looked down for a moment, then up again. "There was a little girl in the recovery wing," he said. "She had a facial condition too. She touched my face and said, 'You're not scary.' That moment healed something that no scalpel could." He smiled. "I don't stand here as a medical miracle. I'm not here to be an inspiration or a headline. I'm just a person who lived through something rare and came out not fixed but fuller, complete, because I finally understood that scars don't mean broken. They mean survival." He stepped back from the mic, then paused. One final thought. One day someone will look at you, at your pain, your past, your differences, and not flinch. The question is, will you let them? Silence. Then applause. It started slow, almost hesitant. Then it grew, a wave of standing, sustained applause that filled the room. Not for a surgery or a case study, but for the courage it took to become whole again. That evening, Amar sat by the hospital fountain with Yosef. The symposium had ended, but he hadn't left yet. He just wanted one more moment here, where everything had started and where everything had changed. Joseph handed him a small folded paper. It was the very first note Amar had written in the hospital, right after waking from surgery. "If I wake up, I want to look in the mirror and not be afraid." Amar read it, then laughed softly. "You kept this?" Joseph nodded. "You needed to remember what you asked for." "I got more than I asked for," Amar said. "I got to live." They sat together, two silhouettes under the soft yellow glow of the courtyard lights. And for the first time, Amar didn't feel like a shadow. He felt seen, and seen fully. Sometimes, survival isn't about winning a battle. It's about choosing to keep going, even when you've been broken, even when the world only sees your scars. Amar's story reminds us, your worth is not measured by your appearance, but by your courage to be seen, to stand, to begin again. And maybe, just maybe, the face we fear the most is the one we haven't yet learned to love. So let us ask you this. Have you ever hidden a part of yourself, afraid the world might not accept it? Share your story in the comments. You never know who needs to hear it. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or made you see beauty in a different way, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more real-life journeys like Amar's, because out there someone's fighting their own silent battle, and your next click might be the light they've been waiting for.